Hi, and welcome to episode 112 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First, let's look at our Toke Signals bud pick of the week. This is a heavy indica. It's got some nice purplage too. It's called Kimbo Kush, and I found it at Green Thumb Silverdale. Well worth that medical price of $10 a gram. Boy, I'm going to miss those prices come July when they take that away from us. Let's do the news now, shall we? From the United Kingdom this week, a major study finds marijuana does not reduce IQ in teens. Reefer madness has been debunked yet again, as a large study conducted in the United Kingdom failed to find any evidence of a link between cannabis use and lower intelligence among teenagers. The study was published online January 6th in the Journal of Psychopharmacology, and it found that any statistical association between marijuana use and decreased intellectual performance vanished when researchers took other variables into account. The study looked at 2,235 teenagers who participated in the Avon Longitudinal Study of Parents and Children, ALSPAC, a long-term study following children born in the Bristol area of the UK between 1991 and 1992. The kids had their IQ tested at the age of 8 and then again at the age of 15. Nearly a quarter of the participants reported having tried marijuana at least once during that time, and 3.3% had used it at least 50 times. The notion that cannabis use itself is causally related to lower IQ and poorer educational performance was not supported in this large teenager sample, wrote lead researcher Claire Macris of the University College London and her colleagues. The teenage cannabis users had lower IQ scores and worse educational performance, but the researchers found no evidence marijuana itself was to blame for that correlation. Those who used cannabis as teenagers were also more likely, you see, to have used other drugs, such as tobacco and alcohol. After adjustment to account for these group differences, cannabis use by the age of 15 did not predict either lower teenage IQ scores or poorer educational performance, the researchers explained. These findings therefore suggest that cannabis use at the modest levels used by this sample of teenagers is not by itself causally related to cognitive impairment. Instead, our findings imply that previously reported associations between adolescent cannabis use and poorer intellectual and educational outcomes may be confounded to a significant degree by related factors. Teenagers who had used cannabis more than 50 times had an IQ score that was only 0.1 point lower than those who had never used marijuana at all on the average. The findings contradict those of a smaller study from 2012, which found that cannabis users could lose an average of 6 IQ points between ages 13 and 38. That study, published in the journal PNAS, was based on a longitudinal study of 1,037 New Zealand residents. Our findings suggest cannabis may not have a detrimental effect on cognition once we account for other related factors, Macris said. This may suggest that previous research findings showing poorer cognitive performance in cannabis users may have resulted from the lifestyle, behavior, and personal history typically associated with cannabis use, rather than with cannabis use itself. People often believe that using cannabis can be very damaging to intellectual ability in the long term, but it is extremely difficult to separate the direct effects of cannabis from other potential explanations, according to Macris. Adolescent cannabis use often goes hand in hand with other drug use, such as alcohol and cigarette smoking, as well as other risky lifestyle choices. It's hard to know what causes what. Do kids do badly at school because they're smoking weed? Or do they smoke weed because they're doing badly at school? This study suggests it is not as simple as saying cannabis is the problem. In Arizona this week, the marijuana legalization campaign there is nearing its signature goal. This campaign to legalize marijuana in Arizona is nearing its goal of 150,000 valid signatures to qualify for this November's ballot, supporters announced on Wednesday. This initiative would give Arizona voters the opportunity to legalize cannabis for recreational use. It would establish a network of licensed marijuana stores where sales would be taxed. The campaign to regulate marijuana like alcohol is just a few thousand signatures short of the 150,642 needed to qualify, according to spokesman Barrett Marson. The group is aiming for 225,000 signatures to make up for those which are likely invalid, according to Marson. Arizonans, he said, are clearly excited about this initiative. A whack job anti-cannabis group calling itself Arizonans for Responsible Drug Policy is opposing the measure, pointing to a new U.S. Department of Health and Human Services survey showing Colorado leading the nation in past month marijuana use now that weed is legal there. Under Arizona's proposed Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, adults 21 and older could possess up to an ounce of cannabis and grow up to 6 plants in their homes without a license, as long as the plants are in a, quote, secure area. It would create a distribution system similar to Colorado's, where state-licensed businesses produce and sell cannabis. It would also create a Department of Marijuana Licenses and Control to regulate the cultivation, manufacturing, testing, transportation, and sale of marijuana, and it would give local governments the authority to regulate and ban marijuana stores. The act would also establish a 15% tax on retail cannabis sales, with proceeds going to education, including full-day kindergarten and public health. Under the initiative's language, driving while impaired by marijuana would remain illegal, as would public consumption and selling or giving weed to anyone under 21 years old. Taxation of the program would pay the state's cost of implementing and enforcing the initiative. 40% of cannabis taxes would be earmarked for the Department of Education for construction, maintenance, and operational costs, including salaries of K-12 teachers. Another 40% would go to full-day kindergarten programs. 20% would go to the Arizona Department of Health Services for unspecified uses, perhaps office parties. Revenue from marijuana taxes could not flow into Arizona's general fund, which would allow it to be spent for other purposes. In Oregon this week, marijuana shoppers are adjusting to a 25% sales tax. Recreational marijuana shoppers in Oregon are taking a new 25% sales tax in stride, according to many dispensary owners and industry observers. The state, on January the 1st, after a 3-month tax holiday, imposed the tax on recreational cannabis sales. The tax will eventually be replaced with a 17% sales tax once the Oregon Liquor Control Commission takes control of the new recreational marijuana industry later this year. While some customers have shrugged off the tax, we have people that say they would rather go back to their guy, so to speak, and walk out, said Matt Price, who owns the Cannabis chain of dispensaries. General Manager Nathan Kreitenberg at Glisten Buds and Foster Buds took the unusual step of absorbing the tax. He says his strategic decision should generate enough additional sales to cover the 25% hit. Kreitenberg said he hopes his move generates customer loyalty. More than 100 shops compete for the cannabis customers in Portland, and there's a well-established black market there as well. To be quite honest with you, if we even take a small hit, I believe the fact that we are doing this will put us in a better market position, said Kreitenberg. His Glisten Buds and Foster Buds shop sell marijuana for $9 and $15 per gram. Oregon's marijuana shoppers have traditionally enjoyed some of the most reasonable prices on the Pacific Coast. I always enjoy my visits there. California and Washington both have tax and regulated marijuana markets, medical in California and recreational in Washington. Oregon Department of Revenue officials said shops are free to absorb the tax or pass it along to the customer or spread it among the grower, shop, and consumer. They just want to make sure the tax is paid in full. We have no authority over pricing, said Julia Dodson, a spokeswoman for the DOR. Dispensaries can charge whatever they decide. The agency won't start collecting the tax until February. Only about half of dispensaries selling recreational weed have registered with the Department of Revenue so far, and this is required. In Maine this week, a school board allows students medical marijuana on school property. The school board in Auburn, Maine this week voted to allow students to be administered medical marijuana while on school property. Maine voters legalized medicinal cannabis back in 1999. Effective immediately, students in pre-K through high school who are authorized to use medical marijuana can be administered cannabis on school property by a parent or a caregiver. This policy prohibits smoking. Most children who are authorized to use cannabis use edible extracts or tinctures. Auburn Superintendent Katie Grondin said school districts must make sure medical marijuana doesn't interfere with education. It's what the doctor and the family decides is in the best interest of the child, she said. We're not getting involved in it medically. Morgan Fox of the Marijuana Policy Project said laws that allow access to medical marijuana while in school are about providing kids with the medicine they need to be able to attend at all. These kids, just because they're sick, shouldn't have their education interrupted, he said. The Auburn School Board's decision came 2 months after a New Jersey school became the first in the nation to allow medicinal cannabis. The Lark School in Belmar, New Jersey, instituted the policy after Jeannie Barber, 16, who suffers from potentially life-threatening epileptic seizures, fought for the right to take edible cannabis on school property. A nurse at the special education school provides Jenny with a midday dose of cannabis oil. According to Nicole Snow of the Massachusetts Patient Advocacy Alliance, medical marijuana should be coming to Massachusetts schools as well. Initially, there's a lot of fear, Snow said, but she's seeing an increase in demand from parents for more natural treatments for seizures and autism. School districts are trying to find their way and navigate this landscape as laws develop and social norms change, said Francisco Negron, General Counsel of the National School Boards Association. This is a situation, he said, in which the changing social norms are ahead of the existing operational structure. In Illinois this week, there is a change.org petition to add conditions to the state's medical marijuana law. The medical marijuana program in Illinois just officially came online in November. Now a push to get the state to allow people with a growing number of medical conditions to legally qualify for the program is picking up steam. Late last year, the State Medical Cannabis Advisory Board recommended letting people suffering from PTSD, chronic pain, and autism, among other conditions, legally use medical cannabis. The State Department of Public Health is expected to make a decision by the end of this month. A Change.org petition calling on state officials to approve the added conditions is gaining momentum with nearly 10,000 signatures right now. You can find the link in the Hemp News story for that Change.org petition so you can sign it. Globally this week, fans mourned the death of longtime cannabis enthusiast and music legend David Bowie. A lifetime of music came to an end on Sunday, January 10th, as music legend Bowie died after an 18-month struggle with cancer. David Bowie died peacefully today, surrounded by his family after a courageous 18-month battle with cancer, the artist's Facebook page announced. While many of you will share in this loss, we ask that you respect the family's privacy during their time of grief. Now, nearly 40 years ago, back on March 21st, 1976, Bowie was arrested along with rocker Iggy Pop for possession of about half a pound of weed. Bowie, Pop, and another man and woman were staying in a 3-room suite at the Americana Rochester Hotel when they were raided by the Vice Squad detectives at about 2:25 a.m. All 4 were held for a few hours at the Monroe County Jail before they were each freed on a $2,000 bond. Bowie paid everybody's bail. 3 days later, David returned to the Rochester court where he was welcomed by a crowd of about 200 fans, reporters, and the screams of about half a dozen suspected prostitutes awaiting arraignment in the rear of the corridor outside the courtroom. Asked for a plea by City Court Judge Alphonse Cassetti to the charge of 5th-degree criminal possession of a controlled substance, Bowie said, "Not guilty, sir." The court used his real name, David Jones. Bowie wore a gray 3-piece leisure suit and a pale brown shirt. He was holding a matching hat. His 2 companions were arraigned on the same charge. Charged with a Class C felony, Bowie technically faced up to 15 years in prison, but the charges were ultimately dropped. After the arraignment, Bowie told reporters that the local police had been very courteous and very gentle with him since the arrest. "They've been just super," he said, adding that he was very flattered and felt very honored by the fans who waited outside court for more than 2 hours to catch a glimpse of the star. In Texas this week, Customs seizes fake carrots stuffed with more than a ton of marijuana. U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents on January 10th discovered more than a ton of marijuana disguised as carrots on the border between Mexico and the United States near McAllen, Texas. Agents first performed a search of the vehicle carrying what appeared to be a commercial shipment of carrots by using non-intrusive imaging technology. Then they took a second pass with drug-detecting dogs. Bundles of marijuana were wrapped in orange tape disguised as large carrots in the shipment, which was crossing the FAR Reynosa International Bridge. There were 2,817 carrot-shaped packages of marijuana, which agents claim were worth $499,000 on the street. Once again, drug smuggling organizations have demonstrated their creativity in attempting to smuggle large quantities of narcotics across the U.S.-Mexico border, said Port Director Ephraim Salas Jr. of the Hidalgo, Far, Ansel Lewis Port of Entry. Our officers are always ready to meet those challenges and remain vigilant towards any type of illicit activities, he said. Homeland Security agents will follow up on the Carrot investigation, authorities said. Before we go, we have a must-read for you this week on the pages of TokeSignals.com. As some of you have seen, all week we've had excellent coverage of the Lance Glore medical marijuana trial. The coverage of Day 6 went up on Thursday the 14th. A juror was taken out on a gurney from the deliberation room. Apparently, the stress of the deliberations over a 2-day period became too much for this one patient who happens to be a medical marijuana patient and who had been denied her medication because she was on federal property. It's all very interesting, but a man's life is hanging in the balance. He could get 35 years to life in prison. You can keep up with the latest on TokeSignals.com. Stay tuned. Until next week, stay lifted. See you then.